It was absolutely great. I learned so much. It took away all of my fears that I had about homeschooling. And now every year after I go for conversation and meeting people, it's great to not feel alone in a world of homeschooling, to be under one roof with thousands of other parents who have the same goal as you do. It's so freeing.
Hi, welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast. This podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast, where our goal is to help you thrive in your homeschool journey. Let me take just a minute to ask you to please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen or watch, including YouTube. And if this podcast has been encouraging you, please leave us a 5-star review. Every review helps us. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We post a lot of content there. Well, today we're doing something a little bit different. I have 2 special guests on the podcast. First is my dear friend, whom you all know, Nancy Manos, and she is here to talk with me about the importance of homeschool conferences and conventions. Joe and I both spoke at the North Dakota Homeschool Convention in February, and it just reminded me again of the great value of these homeschooling conventions, the opportunity to get together, network, make new friends, hear speakers, see curriculum. They're just a really powerful opportunity for homeschooling moms and dads that we don't want you to miss. And while I was there, I met a new friend, Kristin Christianson. She's going to be my second guest. I want you to meet her. I would have never met Kristin had we not both been attending this convention in North Dakota. She has 3 children. She was homeschooled. She's homeschooling her children now, and she has used BJU Press homeschool curriculum in both instances while she was being homeschooled and while she's homeschooling. As you know, BJU Press is the sponsor of our podcast. So we had so much fun connecting, and I wanted to share my new friend with you, my old friend with you, and encourage you this year to go to your state convention. So now I just want to welcome Nancy. Nancy, thank you for always being at the podcast, whether you're behind the scenes working or a guest. I appreciate you so much.
Well, I appreciate you, and it's such a joy to be part of, So
tell me how you got involved with state homeschool conventions.
So back when we were living in Minnesota and our girls were like 1 and 3, we were just on the cusp of deciding to homeschool. And I was invited to go to the Mache, Minnesota convention. My kids were little bitties. And it really was the thing that kind of was like, oh, there's tons of other people doing this. And I caught the vision for it. The vendor hall, getting to see all the curriculum and resources and hearing speakers. Then when we moved to Arizona, I knew I needed to find the statewide homeschool organization and become a member and go to the convention. We moved to Arizona in April and we went to the convention in July, and I have been going every year since 1999. And so,
wow.
Yeah, and of course my kids are graduated and grown now, but I still love to go and just be part of that. Like, there's nothing like gathering together with thousands of other parents who are on this journey of homeschooling together. That's kind of how I got started. And then, we were invited in 2004 to serve on the board of directors for the Arizona statewide homeschool organization. And we served for 16 years, and I ran the homeschool convention for 10 of those years and served on the committee and did tons of different jobs. And I love everything about the convention. I love the vendors. I love the speakers. I love the community. So there's so much to love about the homeschool convention in your state.
Well, that is quite a recommendation. So, when you were at your very first one, did you feel overwhelmed at all, or was it just like this new door opening?
Well, it was really exciting because I was with a friend who had been before, and so she was kind of my tour guide. So it wasn't as overwhelming as I think if I'd just gone all by myself. Um,
Because you
so
can walk into these vendor halls and you have a program with all these speakers. So this is like point number one, if you're new to homeschooling conferences, is find a friend or a tour guide like Nancy had, just to kind of show you around a little bit, help you navigate some things.
yeah, and if you don't have a friend, you don't know somebody that's going, I think almost every statewide homeschool organization has like a mentoring moms table or an information booth. Like their board and their volunteers are there to help you. So talk to the people that are running the convention. Ask at the registration desk, "Hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed and lost. Where do I start?" And they will point you in the right direction. Like they want you to have success and not feel overwhelmed. So
Also, here's another pointer. If you're new, I would encourage you to go first to the BJU Press Homeschool table, the booth. We usually have a ton of booths, and we have great staff and consultants who are there, homeschool mom
yes.
consultants who are running the booth. They can answer a lot of your questions too. So just know, and you'll also get the best discount of the year on our curriculum there. So they are there to help. And like Nancy said, the homeschool associations will have a help table there, a help desk or booth where you can go and find out the lay of the land as well. But go and enjoy it. So Nancy, what would you say about navigating the curriculum hall?
Well, when I started homeschooling I don't know what year that would have been, 2001 maybe. Um, I, I've lost all track of time, but a long time ago when I started homeschooling, there were fewer resources. And so it can be overwhelming because there are so many resources. And of course, they're not all represented in the exhibit hall, but I would say walk through, get kind of an overview of everything that's there. Talk to the different publishers and vendors like BJU Press. Every single one of them will have someone can walk you through their products, answer your questions. And then I would say take some time to kind of compare and really it helps to go with maybe like a shopping list of, I need math. I want to teach Spanish this year. Whatever you need or are looking for. And then what are your like bonus extras? Leave a little room for that too, because sometimes you'll run into like, hey, there's a unit study on Little House on the Prairie. This would be really fun to do with my kids this year that you didn't even know was going to be there. So you will be delighted and surprised by some unexpected resources and things. But I would say go with a budget, go with a plan. Like we need to cover these things for sure. And then kind of do the shop and compare. Like, okay, sometimes the teacher's manuals are written in a way that work really well for you as the mom. And sometimes they're not. One time I bought a writing curriculum and I remember being confused. And I went back the next year and I was like, this is working great for my kids, but not for me. And she said, are you a linear thinker? Like, as a matter of fact, I am. And the teacher manual wasn't written with my kind of thinker in mind. And so just know that you're buying resources for your kids, but also for you as the teacher. And that's where really like the BJU consultants are fantastic because they'll help you find the right product within the BJU Press Homeschool suite of products. There's so many great resources. But yeah, you'll just find it can be overwhelming to walk in and go, I don't even know where to start. Just walk up and down all the hallway, all the aisles, and make notes as you go.
And ask questions. They're there to answer your questions. And pick up a book. This is your opportunity to look at the physical resource.
Yes.
You've been wondering, what did this look like? So I would say the second thing then are the speakers,
Yeah.
and you can really be encouraged. You have speakers who are inspirational. You have speakers who are practical. You have speakers for representing different curriculum. And so they're all different types of speakers: keynote speakers, workshop speakers, mothers' night out speakers. And so just take advantage of hearing from some seasoned veterans who can save you some mistakes and heartaches in your journey.
Yes. One thing I love about the conventions that I've either attended or spoken at or run is we're very intentional about selecting speakers that will encourage you. We don't ever want a mom to feel like there's some artificial perfection level you have to achieve in order to homeschool your kids. You're not going to come away feeling like I could never measure up. You're going to feel encouraged, like I can do this. And they all have, workshops for new homeschoolers. If you're homeschooling high school, if you're homeschooling children with special needs, there's all sorts of topics. And then, like you said, the practical, how to teach math, how to teach science, so there's so much encouragement that you can walk away with. If you have a husband who's maybe not on board yet with homeschooling, or, that can be another great thing. Attend with your spouse. And there's so many great workshops taught by men for men. And
Yes,
not all of
Joe does one on the story
Yes.
of a reluctant homeschool dad, because
Yeah.
that's what he was. And so he says he went from homeschool agnostic to fanatic over the
And so
years,
you can both get on the same page, and there's encouragement for husbands too. There's a lot of great practical information, statistics about why homeschooling is such a great model of education, but it's good for the whole family, and it's really good for couples to attend together if you can.
And then I would say the third great advantage of the homeschool conferences are just meeting new people. People that you can share your experience with, and people you can go to for advice. When you're standing at that curriculum table, if there's a line, say, "What have you liked about homeschooling?" Or, "I'm struggling with this." Or, this one girl, Kristin, who is going to be our next guest on the podcast, just came up and introduced herself to me. And we started talking. I felt like I had a new friend. She was telling me about homeschooling growing up and how she used BJU Press then and uses it now with her kids. So we had a conversation on so many levels for husbands in the state legislature in North Dakota, which is right up my alley. And so I'm telling you, it was freezing there. It was like -4 degrees. But inside that convention hall with 1,000 other people, and the warmth of fellowship and unique aligned vision is just powerful. I'll always remember my conversations with Kristin. And, it was just amazing to have that friendship, that new friendship.
It really is. And you don't know, when you're waiting for a workshop to start, chatting with the person sitting next to you. I've always been so amazed at how God will put the right person there, and you'll make a new friend completely unexpectedly, and you'll have something in common, or maybe they have an answer. God's going to answer a question that you have through the random person sitting next to you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, Nancy, we have never had such a short conversation about
I know.
anything in our lives. But we're going to wrap it up here. Can you tell people where they can find where and when their state convention will be held?
Yes, so we have a national website called homeschoolfreedom.com, and there's a national events calendar that has all of the conventions and even capital days and things like that, hosted by the statewide homeschool organization. So if you go to homeschoolfreedom.com, you'll see a tab at the top for Find Your State Organization or Events, and you can find a convention near you. And these organizations serve homeschool families all year long. They're not just a convention hosting organization. It's probably their biggest event of the year, but they're there to serve your family, protecting the freedom to homeschool and answer your questions, help you have confidence in your homeschooling.
Well, Nancy, as always, thank you for joining me today and sharing your unique wisdom that you have from being so involved in so many different aspects of the homeschooling community. And thank you, my friend.
You betcha. So exciting.
And now I want to introduce to you my new friend, Kristin Christianson. So, Kristin, thank you for being with me today. I have to tell you a little bit about Kristin before we get going. We met at the North Dakota conference or convention just 2 weekends ago. I think that's
Yes.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was real recent, and we just hit it off and spent a lot of time talking. Her husband is in the North Dakota legislature. So we had, we were talking about all things legislatively as well. So, Kristin, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your family as we start the podcast today.
So I have 3 children. My oldest is 9. His name is Hans. My second is a girl. Her name is Sophia, and she is 7. And my third is 2, and she is her name is Elin. So I'm just homeschooling the other 2, and while Dad goes to work at I always want to say White House, but I know it's not the White House.
The State House.
Yes. State House.
Maybe those are prophetic utterances. We'll just have to wait and see. So tell me why you went to the North Dakota conference. What were you looking to not get out of the conference, but I guess what were the benefits you were looking for?
The first time I went was 3 years ago. My husband had great fear sending me because I was 9 months pregnant. And he's like, please don't have this baby at the convention. But it was absolutely great. I learned so much. It took away all of my fears that I had about homeschooling. And now every year after I go for conversation and meeting people, and it's great to not feel alone in a world of homeschooling, to be under one roof with thousands of other parents who have the same goal as you do. And it's so freeing to see that.
That is really powerful. And I'm so glad you said those things. I wish I could make everybody who's listening or watching today understand that it's not an extra burden to go to a homeschooling convention. It's really just this shot in the arm that is like time release, and it keeps giving and giving and giving just from the fellowship, if nothing else. So I'm so glad to hear you say those things. What is something in particular you learned at the convention this year?
I have to confess that I listened to the audio of your husband's Man's Only class.
I'll tell Joe he'll like that. This is a workshop called Raising G-rated Kids Raising G-rated Sons in an R-rated World.
Oh man, Zan, I learned so much from that class, even as a mother, about how this stuff is seeping into our children, and we think that we are protecting them. And wow, that was a great class.
Well, I am so glad to hear that. Joe will be thrilled about that too. One of the things you and I talked about some after one of my sessions was just the fact that our kids don't belong to the state. They belong to us. And now I know your husband is in the legislature, and so you're aware of freedom issues, maybe more than a lot of people. But why was that important to you?
Maybe it's that inner selfish issue, or that inner self, that little child that's like, mine, mine, mine. It's all mine. And but it's different than a toy or a cup, because a cup and a toy you aren't raising to go out into the world and change the world. You're raising your child, and the world is not a place that I want my child to think is normal, because the world is always changing. The world is different from when I was a child, and it's a lot different from now, but you have to have that freedom to instill those core set of values that your child can carry.
It is very important to know, I mean, that our children, like the Supreme Court decision says, are not the mere creature of the state. But as parents, God has loaned them to us. While they're on this earth, they belong to us. And it's up to us to do the best we can for them in terms of raising them with a biblical worldview, raising them to love Christ, raising them to be good citizens. And those are things we really can't delegate to other people. So now you were homeschooled growing up.
Yes, I was homeschooled until 7th grade. And the only reason I had to go to public school was because my parents divorced.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. But so I have some knowledge of both sides, and I can definitely tell you that um, I excelled far better in homeschool than I did in public school.
That is so interesting. So what curriculum did your mom use with you while you were in 1st through 6th?
It was a combination of BJU Press and ACE.
So, Kristin, tell me a little bit. I know you said you used some BJU Press growing up, and that you used the green readers. So let's talk about a minute about the green readers.
Yes, I actually brought them to show you.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
These are 1st grade that I found on the shelf at a thrift store.
Oh, that's amazing.
And the pictures inside are great. This is actually my favorite story from when I was a little girl.
Oh, and what is the name of that story? Do you remember?
This one is The Case of the Missing Treasure.
Interesting. I had 2 favorite stories in my kids' readers. So I grew up in the church, but we never focused, or I don't remember focusing or learning from the Old Testament. That's probably a user error on my part. But as the boys started going through the BJU Press Homeschool readers, I just started learning so much Bible history. It was pretty amazing. And I'll never forget reading the story of Esther, and for such a time as this. During all the time I was going through, the threats of jail and the legislature and all of that. I mean, I had no inclination that I was Esther, but the principles there of we were all born for such a time as this. It's really just had a profound impact on me. And there was a story about marriage that I still draw from. And my kids we used to talk about these stories all the time. So when I found another Green Reader fan, we just needed to talk about that for a little while. So now and I just have to say, BJU Press Homeschool is the sponsor of our podcast, and I'm so thankful to them for doing that. And their new readers are also great, and it's very hard to find the old readers you wouldn't want to anyway, but I love the history in our home that we had over those readers. So what are you using these days?
I'm using a combination of BJU Press, and for history and science, I'm a little eclectic. So I buy the history and science readers from BJU, and then we just sit on the couch and open them and read them and talk about them.
Oh, that is great. That is a great way to learn together. We did a lot of that with our kids growing up, sitting and just reading and using the textbooks as our reference point and ideas and all of that. So this is your 3rd year to homeschool, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So what was your husband also homeschooled?
He was not.
And so how does
He
how did he feel when you told him you wanted to homeschool?
he was a little reluctant. He comes from a family of school teachers, so he was very reluctant on that side of it.
And how does he feel now that you've been homeschooling for a few years and he sees the kids?
He will never send them to any school.
So he's become a convert.
Yes. Yes, very much a convert.
So what have you enjoyed the most about homeschooling?
Seeing my children learn and catch on with reading and writing and thinking, just having those critical thinking skills. We can sit down and open a book and read through it, and I'll ask them if they have any questions, and they've got the things that I would never think of. They just pull out of their little brains and they just make all of these little tacks. And it's really amazing to see.
You know, that is one thing that the BJU Press curriculum is well known for, and its foundation of critical thinking. Yeah, I think there are 4 foundational principles: the biblical worldview, the critical thinking, engaged learning, and technological solutions, with the hub and those types of things. But I'm so glad to hear you say that, because if ever our kids have needed critical thinking skills to face the world, it's now. Now, your husband, when did he run for the state legislature in North Dakota?
This past summer.
So this is his first term.
Correct.
So what was the election process like? Were y'all involved as a family? Did you get out and knock on doors, or how did that go?
Yes. My older two did a lot of door knocking. They would go with him and they put many miles on their shoes. I had to get them new shoes a couple times. What we found out is that people are more willing to talk and not dismiss when there's children involved.
Oh, that's interesting. That is very interesting. That's a that's a good commentary on our society a little bit. You know, we could use some good commentaries on our society. And so did the children ever participate in the dialogue, or was it mainly your husband talking about issues, or how did they view that time they were with their dad?
They would hand out flyers. They learned a lot about shaking hands, saying their name, just good, proper skills that most kids don't have.
Right,
So
right.
they are very good at that.
You know, I think that's one thing that is so pronounced about homeschool kids is they know how to talk to adults. And I can remember having my children in the legislature, and all these families would bring their children with them to legislative rallies or hearings or whatever the need was at the moment. And the comments always were, these children know how to talk to adults. And just like you said, they knew how to look somebody in the eye, shake their hand, and really have a conversation with adults. So those are great learning practices for your kids. So did y'all have any celebrations the night of the election?
Yes. Yes. We met at a local diner of sorts, and we watched the news and everything. And then the children were getting tired, so we took them home. And then right as we got home, we pulled up our news app and found out that my husband won the election.
I know you said that he's already introduced some bills. And you were telling me a little bit about the most recent bill or the most controversial bill, I guess, he's introduced up until this point.
Yes. A very controversial bill that he introduced was posting the 10 Commandments in one room of every public school as a historical document. Now, in the state of North Dakota, that had been the law until about, I think it was the 1980s. And then that was, yeah, it was the 1970s or 1980s. And then there was some kind of lawsuit about it, and then that was taken down. Now, currently, North Dakota does have a law that the 10 Commandments can be put in if the local school board says yes. So far, to my knowledge, that has not happened.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And so, just as recently as the 70s or 80s, the 10 Commandments were up somewhere in each of the public school districts. I I remember being at a dinner where Charles Colson spoke, and you may not be familiar with him, but he was part of Watergate, part of the legal counsel team for Richard Nixon when Watergate went down, and he was in jail for a while. And he came to Christ when he was in prison over the whole Watergate issue and started a prison ministry called Prison Fellowship. And later, he did a lot of work teaching people. He wrote a book with co-authored a book called "How Now Should We Then Live," or how now shall we live? And after Francis Schaeffer's book, "How Should We Then Live?" And he talked a lot about the principles of education. He was actually in a school in Chicago, and the superintendent was bemoaning to him all the student-on-student crime that was taking place in their school. And then he was bragging about removing the 10 Commandments from the walls in the schools. And Chuck Colson said, well, sometimes when we remove the rules, we have to pay the price. And so I do think there is, it's not such a distant part of our future as a nation that, I mean, as in our culture as a nation, that we did have the 10 Commandments up in all of our schools. And like you say, this was as a historical document in North Dakota, but I think that's very interesting. So do you ever go down, and sit in well, we call it the General Assembly, or just watch the proceedings with your kids so they can see your husband? Have you done that yet?
Yes, we have done that 3 or 4 times now, and my older children take turns sitting with him and pushing the buttons to vote and that kind of thing.
Oh, that's great. One of the things that I learned that were so surprising to me when I was doing all the legislative work in South Carolina, and that is how much a relationship with one constituent can change the mind of a legislator. In your family, it's certainly not the case because your husband, intimately knows homeschooling. But I sat through so many hearings where we were about to lose a vote. And people were talking about those crazy homeschoolers or senators were or whatever. And one person would have the guts to stand up and say, well, I was invited into the home of this homeschooling family for dinner one night. And he said, I have to tell you, it changed my mind. It changed everything I believed about homeschooling because the children were articulate and well-mannered. They were hospitable. And he said it was just game-changing. So, I know North Dakota is a free state, but it's great that your kids are down there and learning those lessons. Gosh, what valuable life lessons. Let me ask you a couple of things before we wrap up. You're still a mom in the trenches. I've got grandkids, but there's nothing like doing the day in, day out of homeschooling. Have you had any particular struggles or victories that you want to share with moms and dads today?
My biggest struggle has been reading. And I just I can't stress enough that every child is different.
That's right.
Public school says that every child has to start learning by age 5. They have to be reading by a certain age. They have to be writing by a certain age. They have to be spelling by a certain age. Do not let that hinder you. I fell into that trap, and I'm so thankful that God gave me the grace and the patience and the knowledge to tell the people with their unsoliciting advice to just be quiet and go away, and it will happen when it happens.
And that is true. That's one of the greatest things about homeschooling, I think, is the freedom and flexibility to let your children learn when they're ready. And it doesn't mean every child will read at 6 or 7 or 4 or 8, but they'll read on their own timeline. My kids all read. I had a daughter who, unbeknownst to me, had just taught herself to read, and she started reading in the 1st grade like we had been doing this all of her life, and then the 2 boys were just a year later than would have been, quote, "normal" in a class setting, but when they started reading, and who cares if that's 6 or 8 when they get to be adults? So I think that freedom to work with our children and not pressure them into things that they're not ready for is such a great part of homeschooling. And and you're right, Kristen, you can forget sometimes. I mean, I forget how much pressure there is on young moms from neighbors. Everybody wants to tell you the best way to do things, or people in church or family members or whatever.
Yes, everybody has an opinion, and everybody wants you to do exactly what they tell you. And if you don't do exactly what they tell you, well, that's why it's not working.
Yeah, a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks when it comes to being a homeschooling mom, that's for sure. One of the things that we've been talking about, the BJU Press curriculum today, that I love is that we have about 200 consultants around the country who are homeschool moms who use the curriculum. And so if you ever need, if those of you who are listening or watching today want information about the BJU Press curriculum or need help with it, we have consultants who have been where you are and can teach you to use it or just answer your questions. And you can find them at homeschoolhelp.com/map. And you click on the state where you live, and you'll be able to identify consultants in your area who can answer your homeschool questions, especially curriculum questions or any of the questions about how to get started. They're just a wealth of information. One of the things I love the most about what we're doing here. Well, Kristen, before we leave, do you have a favorite Bible verse or words of encouragement you would like to share with moms?
Yes, I have one for myself and one for my children. The one for my children is Proverbs 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. I think it's extremely important that we instill those values and keep them going. And my personal verse is Proverbs 31, verse 30. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And I love that verse because we live in a world where you have to have the perfect makeup, you have to have the perfect dress, you have to have the perfect hair, you have to have the perfect car, you have to have the perfect everything. Otherwise, you're not a good mother, wife, daughter, woman, whatever. But God says, no, just fear me and praise me, and you are more than beautiful.
Those are great words to end on because we live in a social media world, and I think if anything else, it's caused us to compare ourselves more than we ever have before, and we don't need to do that, like you say. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for being with us today on the podcast, and it was so much fun to get to know you and your husband and see your children when we were in North Dakota.
Thank you. Do we have like one more minute possibly?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I want to show you in on the BJU website under the Journey Forth books. I absolutely love that BJU keeps the covers and does not change them over time, because these two books are on the Journey Forth website, and I read these as a child. This one was my absolute favorite, The Cranky Blue Crab. And this is a great story to teach children that the grass is not always greener on the other side. And On Yonder Mountain, this is about a little girl who gets to go to first grade at a one-room schoolhouse, and she's the only girl there. So all year she prays for a little girl to come to school. And it's a great story for children about faith and perseverance with their prayer. So
that's fabulous. Those Journey Forth books are amazing. They are amazing. And I'm so glad you shared that with us. Any other thoughts?
No. Oh,
Okay.
your book was amazing. I read it in one night.
And I guess you're talking about the book Refined, A Homeschool Mom's Call to Trust, the one that we gave out at the conference. Yes. So sometimes when I speak, I'll take this book that I wrote. BJU Press Homeschool commissioned me to write this book, and we give it away free. And so we only give it away at places where I'm speaking. And so I'm really glad you enjoyed it. It's a book on burnout, and all homeschool moms, I think if you've homeschooled for more than 3 hours, I've said you've experienced burnout. So, Kristin, as we wrap up, if people have questions for you or your husband, do you have a way people can get in touch with you?
My email, if you want to get in contact with me, is horseslove2000@yahoo.com.
Okay, so there must be a story there with horses. No.
Oh, yes. I've had that email since I was about 15.
That's great. That is great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And I want to thank you all for listening. As always, you can find me at zantyler.com and on social media. May God continue to bless you and your family. And until next week, bye.